whose stories are filled with beauty, devotion, and quiet sorrow. These tales, though tragic, remind us that love, even when touched by heartbreak, is always worth remembering. Breathe deeply, relax, and let the gentle rhythm of these ancient stories carry you away to a place where the stars watched over these legendary lovers, glowing softly against a backdrop of fate and the tender whispers of the heart. Orpheus and Eurydice. In a land of rolling hills, where rivers sang softly through the meadows and the trees swayed like ancient dancers, Orpheus played his golden lyre. The notes he plucked from its strings shimmered in the air, a music so pure and divine that it seemed the very earth held its breath to listen. Birds would pause mid-flight, resting on branches as if caught in a dream. The wild animals, normally shy and swift, would gather near, lulled by the melodies that poured from Orpheus's soul. But there was one heart above all that Orpheus's music had captured. Eurydice, a nymph whose beauty was as soft and gentle as a spring morning, would listen in awe whenever Orpheus played. The sound of his lyre stirred something deep within her, like the awakening of flowers beneath a gentle rain. She had long admired Orpheus from afar, though she remained hidden among the tall grasses and wildflowers, too shy to approach the man whose music could charm the very gods. One fateful day, Orpheus saw her. Their eyes met across the meadow, and in that moment, a bond was formed, a connection so powerful and immediate that it felt as if they had known each other for lifetimes. Eurydice's heart raced as she stepped out from the field, her feet bare and light against the earth, and Orpheus's fingers stilled on the lyre's strings. "Who are you?" he asked softly, his voice no louder than a whisper on the wind. Eurydice smiled, a soft, timid curve of her lips. "I am Eurydice," she replied, her voice as light as the breeze. "And your music, it calls to me." From that moment on, they were inseparable. They walked together through the meadows and woods, where Orpheus would play his lyre just for her. His melodies became brighter, richer, with Eurydice by his side. She would laugh, the sound like the tinkling of water over smooth stones, and Orpheus would play faster, joy bubbling in his chest as they danced under the sun and stars. Their love was pure, untamed, and endless, like the river that flowed beside them, carving its path through the landscape, unwavering. Orpheus would often stop playing just to look at her, taking in the way her hair gleamed like spun gold in the sunlight, or the way her eyes sparkled with joy as they danced together, her bare feet gliding over the soft earth. To him, she was more beautiful than any song he could ever compose. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for them. In the midst of their happiness, when the world seemed perfect, the shadows of destiny began to stir. One afternoon, when the air was thick with the scent of wildflowers and the sun hung low in the sky, Eurydice wandered a little farther from Orpheus than usual. She was entranced by the beauty of the meadow, her fingers brushing lightly over the tops of flowers. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the serpent coiled in the grass until it was too late. The snake struck with terrifying speed, sinking its fangs into her ankle. Eurydice gasped, the pain spreading like fire through her veins. She staggered back, her vision blurring, the world spinning around her. Orpheus heard her cry and rushed to her side, but when he arrived, it was already too late. Eurydice's breath was shallow, her skin cold to the touch. Her eyes, once filled with laughter and life, began to dim, like the fading light of a candle flickering in the wind. "No, no, no," Orpheus whispered, cradling her in his arms. His heart was pounding in his chest, a wild, frantic beat that seemed to echo across the silent meadow. He pressed his lips to her forehead, his tears falling falling like rain onto her still face. "Please don't leave me." But the world was cruel, and death claimed Eurydice before his eyes, her spirit slipping away like a distant melody, fading into silence. Orpheus stayed by her side long after the sun had set, his arms wrapped around her lifeless body. The stars blinked overhead, indifferent to his grief, and the night grew cold. But Orpheus did not feel the chill. All he felt was the overwhelming, crushing weight of his sorrow. In his despair, Orpheus made a decision that would lead him to the very gates of the underworld, the descent into the underworld. The underworld was not a place for the living, yet Orpheus was determined. His love for Eurydice was stronger than any fear, stronger than any boundary that might stand between them. He would face Hades himself if that's what it took to bring her back. The journey to the underworld was long and perilous. Orpheus traveled through lands where the sun never reached, through valleys cloaked in eternal twilight. His golden lyre was his only companion, and he played as he walked, the notes filling the air with sorrow and longing. His music guided him forward, through shadows and silence, through lands where no birds sang, and the wind carried only the faintest whisper of sound. At last, he reached the entrance to the underworld, a dark, yawning cave that seemed to swallow all light. The air was thick and heavy, the scent of death lingering in the shadows. Orpheus hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside, his lyre clutched tightly in his hands. The path was steep and winding, and the farther he descended, the colder the air became. His breath came in shallow gasps, his heart pounding in his chest, but he did not stop. His music filled the cavern, a mournful melody that seemed to echo off the walls, growing louder and louder as he moved deeper into the realm of the dead. The underworld was a place of darkness and despair, where the souls of the dead wandered aimlessly, their faces pale and empty. The river Styx wound its way through the caverns, its black waters silent and still. Orpheus crossed the river with the help of the ferryman, Charon, who was moved by the beauty of his music and allowed him passage. At last, Orpheus stood before the throne of Hades and Persephone, the rulers of the underworld. Hades was cold and distant, his eyes like chips of black stone, while Persephone's gaze held a quiet sadness, as if she, too, had once known the pain of love lost. Orpheus played his lyre, his fingers moving over the strings with a skill and grace that brought tears to the eyes of even the most hardened souls. His music was filled with the anguish of his loss, the depth of his love for Eurydice, and his desperate plea for her return. The melody wound its way through the cavern, rising and falling like the waves of the sea, until even Hades himself was moved. Persephone, her heart softened by Orpheus's music, leaned forward and whispered something to her husband. Hades considered her words for a long moment before turning his cold gaze to Orpheus. "You may take her back," Hades said, his voice as deep and unyielding as the earth itself. "But on one condition. As you lead her out of the underworld, you must not look back. If you do, she will be lost to you forever." Orpheus's heart leaped with hope. He bowed deeply before the gods and thanked them, his voice trembling with gratitude. He turned and began the long journey back to the world of the living, his heart pounding with each step. Eurydice followed behind him, her footsteps soft and faint, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. Orpheus could hear her, could feel her presence, but he dared not look back. His every instinct screamed at him to turn, to see her face just once more, but he held firm, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. The journey seemed endless, the weight of the underworld pressing down on him with each step. The silence was deafening, and the darkness was absolute, But Orpheus kept moving, his fingers gripping the lyre so tightly that his knuckles turned white. At last, he saw the faint glimmer of daylight ahead, the entrance to the cave that would lead them back to the world above. Relief flooded through him, his heart soaring with the knowledge that soon he would be reunited with Eurydice. But as he neared the light, doubt began to creep into his mind. What if she wasn't really behind him? What if Hades had tricked him? The thought gnawed at him, growing stronger with each step. He hesitated, his heart racing in his chest. The light was just ahead, so close he could almost feel its warmth. But the uncertainty, the fear that Eurydice was not truly there, became too much to bear. And so, with trembling hands, Orpheus turned. In that single, heartbreaking moment, he saw her, Eurydice, her face pale and beautiful, her eyes filled with love and sorrow. But even as he reached for her, she began to fade, her form dissolving like mist in the morning